and believe in the good news. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I'm going to take a minute to introduce our guest speaker today. During Lent, we're talking about love and words and deeds, and words and action. That we can talk about love a lot, but it's how we live it and practice it. And so we want to practice a ministry of inclusion, of welcoming all God's people and all their diversity and all their gifts. And so Mikah Meyers was available for us this weekend. He happens to be down in Mississippi, running across the state of Mississippi. And you may remember Mikah. He sang for us and spoke for us a couple of years ago when he was visiting all the national parks in the United States. And he set that world record. And he's continued to do outdoor activities. And his purpose is to promote diversity and inclusion in outdoor culture. So he's running across the state of Mississippi through the state of February. And of course, it turned out to be a very cold task. And the St. Luke Diversity and Justice Task Force is sponsoring one day of his run. And part of the reason we're involved in this is, again, this culture of inclusion. And Mikah is a gay man. He's a Lutheran man. And he is a pastor's kid. And he struggled with how he would be accepted in the Lutheran church. And so we want him to speak his words and learn how we can be a more inclusive church and a more welcoming church and put those words of love into action. So we're thankful for Mikah for sharing these words today, and we want to support his run and wish him well and hope he can stay warm even during these frigid temperatures. So we welcome to St. Luke once again, Mikah Meyers.
Good morning, St. Luke. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Mikah Meyers, and I am coming to you from Mississippi, which is covered in a once-in-a-generation snow right now. In fact, during the 4 years I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, while attending the University of Memphis, I don't think I saw this much snow in the area cumulatively, which is sort of a fitting tie-in to our gospel verse this week, talking about Jesus being in the wilderness, because I feel like I'm in the wilderness in many ways, and I'm sure there's a joke somewhere about when hell freezes over and Mississippi having this much snow. But regardless, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to share some of my story as you walk your own journey and have your focuses at St. Luke. Some of you might be familiar with who I am because of my appearances in Living Lutheran magazine over the years. But for those of you who aren't, my father, Larry Meyer, was the campus minister at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for the bulk of his career. And during that time, he not only grew it to be the largest Lutheran campus ministry in America, but he also won the Distinguished Service Award, which is given annually to the top Lutheran campus minister in the country. Now, if anyone doubts that my dad was worthy of that award, they need only ask my 3 older sisters, because they will all tell you that their favorite memories with my father were when he would drive them to and from college, because they were in that 18 to 25-year-old age range that he specialized in, and they really got to have important conversations with him about life now that they were adults, and it was one of the most memorable times they had with him. For me, growing up the youngest of 4 and a Lutheran PK, pastor's kid, came with a lot of benefits. I always had a community around me. I always had college students who wanted to play ping pong with me, or whose wrists I could twist to play ping pong with me, or sneak me a donut, or read me the comics. In a weird way, it was almost like having 300 brothers and sisters, because they'd all left their younger brothers and sisters behind, and I was the one child at this campus ministry, essentially. The hard part about growing up as a pastor's kid at a campus ministry, or a pastor's kid anywhere, is that you are constantly under the microscope, and you feel this pressure to be the perfect pastor's kid, which I definitely felt. And so with that came a lot of pressures to fit the mold of what a perfect Christian was supposed to be like in America and in Nebraska, and what a perfect Lutheran was supposed to be like, even as a child, a teenager, and a young adult who didn't really understand what that meant. One of the most challenging parts for me when it came to that was that there were parts of me that, even though my church didn't speak about it directly, I knew would not fit that perfect mold of what a perfect Christian was supposed to be. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about today. Because I was 19 years old before I ever met an openly gay adult. Up until that point, my exposure to the LGBT community only came from what I read in the newspaper and what I saw on TV, which taught me 3 very important lessons about LGBT people. Number 1, all gay men grow up to become drag queens. Number 2, the LGBT community spends the entire year plotting how to wear as little clothes as possible on a float downtown. And the 3rd lesson that I learned growing up, and perhaps the most important of them all, was that anyone who was LGBT was going to hell. And there was nothing they could do to stop that. Now, imagine my surprise when I started college at the University of Memphis, and I was walking to class on a cool August day. It was only about 100 degrees. And I went to my first class, and I walked in, and I met my male choir professor and his male partner, who had joined him for the first day of class. And I was sort of wiping the sweat off my brow and looking at them in long pants and sport coats and thinking, you know, it's really hot outside. You could get away with wearing a lot less. You certainly don't have to wear this many clothes. People don't expect that from you. As I watched them, they were so traditionally masculine that I thought to myself, man, I feel bad for you two. You're going to make no money this weekend. You were like the worst drag queens I've ever heard of. And then after class, I saw them climb into a Lexus convertible and drive off, and I thought, what? I don't know any deviants that can afford a Lexus convertible. But from that first encounter, that interaction with someone who said, this is who I am, this is how God made me, this is how I will live my life, as a result, something happened to me. I became the most annoying student at my campus ministry. I ended up at the Wesley Foundation because when I moved down here, I asked everyone where the Lutheran campus ministry was, and all my friends said, what's a Lutheran? But I ended up becoming the most annoying student at the University of Memphis Wesley Foundation because seemingly every day I would meet another LGBT person. I went to music school, so the odds were high. And the more I talked to them and heard about their lives, about their lived experiences, about their truths, about who they were, the more it stood in direct opposition to everything I'd ever been told about LGBT people. And I asked question after question and talked to person after person until one day I had a revelation. I was reading the Bible and I realized that I had come from a city, Lincoln, Nebraska, that at the time was just 4% black, and moved to Memphis, a city that at the time was 68% black. And so my white Midwestern Lutheran pastor's kid got a lot of education outside of the classroom in addition to in the classroom. But one of the things that I found most interesting from my black friends was that among all the stories of hardship that they had to go through, things I never imagined, none of them ever told me that they were told that they were going to hell because they were black. Around that same time, I had a family member who was diagnosed as bipolar, what during biblical times we would probably say meant she had a demon or demons in her. And what I found so interesting was no one in my family was saying she was going to hell for being bipolar. Then there was my youngest sister, who, as much as we like to make fun of her for being the only left-handed member of the family, I can't remember a time that anyone ever said she was going to hell for being left-handed. And what I realized in that moment was what those 3 things had in common was that they were all characteristics that one did not choose for themselves. And so I had to admit, as much as I had been trying to hide it and deny it for my whole life and pray to God nightly, to let me be anything but this. That I was gay, that I had not chosen it. So how could God send me to hell for that? Now, a fascinating thing about Memphis, Tennessee that I've learned after moving away is that more or less it is a very Christian culture. You are sort of expected to be a Christian. Whether or not you are, I think that it's probably harder to advance in the city if you don't sort of profess to be involved with some sort of church. And so as I started the process of coming out, I looked to my gay peers, anyone who was gay basically, to figure out the next steps, just the basics like where to register for my gay card. And what I found so interesting was that as I looked to my LGBTQ plus peers, I realized that I now had two options after coming out. The first was to do what I saw many of them do and say, well, the church says that I can't be gay and Christian, so I'm going to do the opposite of everything they ever told me. Because if they lied to me about that one thing, then what else have they lied to me about? And then on the other end, I saw people who said, well, the church says that I can't be gay and Christian, so I'm going to stay in the closet and marry someone of the opposite gender so I can stay involved with my community and I don't have to lose that standing and everything I've ever known. Except I was here stuck in the middle, having spent 20-some years struggling to accept this part of myself and not wanting to abandon that, but also having spent my entire life quite literally growing up in a church and not wanting to abandon that either. And so I decided to live in that middle space. But that became very hard very quick. There's an amazing quote that I heard Mary and Wright Edelman preach when I was volunteering at the ELCA youth gathering in 2015, and she said, "It's hard to be what you can't see." And when I heard her say that, I realized that's exactly what I was going through my entire life until I was able to come out. I looked around me and I didn't see anyone like me who was openly gay and certainly not openly gay and Christian. And so I had a real hard time being that. As a result of this, after I finished my degree at the University of Memphis, I went away to McGill University in Montreal, and after 2 years there, came back to Memphis and met with those same mentors, my college choir professor and his partner, who now became some of my closest mentors. And I talked to them about what I was thinking about doing post-graduation. I was planning on taking a giant road trip to visit all these incredible places I'd heard about around our country and try to visit all of my relatives now that they were, many of them, over 70. Because having lost my dad when he was just 58 to esophageal cancer, I realized that life is short and we don't know when we're going to lose our loved ones, and that I wanted to make time to see them as an adult. But I also had a secret mission on this road trip. And that mission was to find gay Christians around America, because I was sure I couldn't be the only one. After 9 months and 16,400 miles of traveling to 46 states and provinces and not really finding much of anyone who was able to maintain their faith and their sexual orientation at the same time, I did the only thing any industrious Midwesterner would do. I thought, if I can't find these people, I will just bring them to me. So I moved to Washington, D.C., a place that after traveling around the country seemed like the most welcoming to the idea of LGBT Christians, as I learned that many of the churches in the district of multiple denominations had outreaches to LGBTQ plus people. And I started a group that was specifically for young adult LGBT followers of Jesus. And the reason I say the group in that manner is that I was highly aware that there were many people who were straight even, who had seen what the church had done and said, I could never call myself a Christian because Christians have hurt so many people and done so many things in the name of God that have made people's lives horrible. But I like that Jesus dude. And so I thought, okay, this group will be for anyone who's a follower of Jesus, somebody who is pro-Christ, who is for Christ. And at the same time, I didn't want to call this group something amorphous, something like Reconciling Lutherans or Affirmation, which is the Mormon LGBTQ group, or Reconciling Methodists, or more like Presbyterians, groups that you have no idea what they stand for if you don't already know. I wanted it to be clear that this was a group for young adult followers of Jesus who were not straight. But not straight doesn't sound that good, and I didn't want it to be the LGBTQIA through Z Christian for Jesus group. And so I ended on a term that was the most inclusive I knew, and though it's offensive to some people of my elder generations, to my generation, it's the one word that includes anyone who essentially isn't straight. And that word is queer. So I combined that word queer with the terms for Christ, and an organization, a group, a fellowship called Queer for Christ was born. I'm happy to share with you that during the 4 years I lived in Washington, D.C., that group grew to over 200 young adult LGBTQ plus followers of Jesus. And at our regular monthly gatherings, we would have over 30 attendees, which at the time, and still to this day that I know of, is the largest regular gathering of LGBTQ plus followers of Jesus in the world. What was also so incredible about Queer for Christ is that because it was located in Washington, D.C., people came from every state and territory to work for their Congress representatives, where they came from countries around the world to work for multinational corporations or for their embassies. And so members of Queer for Christ were from Minnesota and from Memphis and from Mongolia and from Madagascar. And they had grown up Lutheran like me, but they were also Methodist and Episcopalian and African Methodist Episcopalian and Presbyterian and Baptist and Catholic and Mormon, and you name it, we had one. But no matter how different we were, no matter where we came from or what our denominational differences were, there was one thing we all shared in common. It was a story. My story and everyone else's story. We all shared that growing up, we felt that we were unwanted by our church, unwanted by our faith, and unwanted by our God. With that knowledge in mind, when I left DC at age 30 to try to set a world record visiting all of America's 419 National Park Service sites, I was acutely aware that there were so many people around the world who did not feel welcome, who did not see themselves in the gospel. And partway through my journey, God, much like a lightning bolt that he sent to Martin Luther, sending him to the ministry, sent me a lightning bolt that called me to add a new mission to my national parks journey. And that mission was to be the LGBT Christian role model that I never saw growing up. And so I was able to use the 1,500 pieces of earned media I gathered on my national parks journey, over 4 per week on average, to share that not only was I a gay man who loved the outdoors, because that's a stereotype we're still working to break, but also that I was not only a pastor's son, but a practicing Christian who just happened to be gay. So people all around the world who came in touch with my story could see that they could be something that they hadn't seen before. One of the most powerful moments of this came when I got an Instagram message from someone who said, "Hello, I am 15 years old and I go to a private Baptist school in Texas and I'm not out of the closet to anyone. But I saw about your national parks journey and I read more about you and I just want to thank you. Because now I know when I grow up I can be ordinary." And he went on to say, "Now that I see you're setting world records, I know when I grow up I can also be extraordinary." So as a result of that national parks journey, I ended up continuing this ministry, and up until COVID was speaking at churches all around the country, was performing a 2-hour, what I called my National Parks Cabaret journey, show all about my national parks expedition, but also about being a gay Christian and also singing songs, using the education that I got at the University of Memphis, a Bachelor of Voice, to share this message through music. I also did this during my national parks journey, performing in over 113 churches, singing for my supper and accepting donations that allowed me to stay on the road and complete this national parks project. So America's Christians funded a gay man to set a world record. If that's not Jesus flipping the script on everything we know in American culture, I don't know what is. Now, to continue this mission, this calling, this vocation that I have found through this travel journey and my work now as a travel writer, I'm near Memphis in Mississippi, recording this from my hotel room in Oxford, Mississippi, as I currently run across the entire state for LGBT equality. Earlier this summer, after the murder of George Floyd, just a few miles away from where I live in downtown Minneapolis, yes, after experiencing all of America, I moved to the Lutheran motherland. But after experiencing my Minneapolitan friends and neighbors sharing that it was time for white people to use our privilege to help make the lives of others easier, I remembered those messages I got from thousands of people around the world who also shared with me that they didn't feel welcome or safe in the outdoors as their queer selves. And I created this symbol that you see on my shirt called the Outside Safe Space, which is meant to be a nonverbal way to communicate, because as Lutherans we tend to be passive aggressive, and I know that if we are, there are lots of others, but it's a symbol that people can wear as a pin or a sticker on their backpack or their water bottle or any of their outdoors gear to non-verbally communicate to LGBTQ plus folks in the outdoors who often don't feel welcome in our great outdoors or rural spaces. That if they have this symbol on them, that they are an ally, that they welcome people to be their authentic selves around them. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm running across Mississippi to raise awareness for this symbol. And the reason I'm in Mississippi is because this past fall I ran across Minnesota to launch this project, knowing that I needed an adventure I could still do during the pandemic in case our governor said we couldn't leave our home states. But I'm in Mississippi because my social media followers voted it the most homophobic state in America. And having lived in Memphis just across the border, I knew a lot of what they were referencing. This sort of silent homophobia that even if people directly don't say it to your face, that they don't like you for being different in this way, you can sense it in the way they look at you, the way they whisper about you, or the way they talk about others. So my challenge to you today, as the people of God put on earth to share God's love with those who might not feel it otherwise, is to take that idea with you and come up with ways in which you can show God's love for LGBTQ plus people who presume that the church does not love them, who presume that they are not wanted in this space, and who presume that they are not wanted as their authentic selves around Christians. So whether it's speaking positively of your LGBTQ plus friends around your children, whether it's doing specific outreach and getting involved with Mid-South Pride or LGBT organizations, or whether it's simply telling your friends and family about me as a gay Lutheran and what I'm doing running across Mississippi, anything you can do to be a vocal ally for LGBTQ plus people will help show them that Christians do love them and there is a God who does love them. By doing that, we are doing God's work in our hands. And in essence, we're doing what God did to Noah by sending a rainbow as a symbol of God's love. We can be that rainbow. We can be that symbol of God's love to people who have felt like they have been lost in the wilderness, stranded in a flood for their entire lives. We can be that beacon of light that beautiful rainbow that shows them and helps them feel God's love. Amen.